Hello warriors from lands afar, it is I, Ole Gamer Joe, back with another Media Moogle review. Today we are taking a look at Eternal Edge Plus, a game that had previously been released on the Nintendo Switch as just Eternal Edge, has now made its way over to Steam with this enhanced edition. It is an action-adventure RPG that will almost undoubtedly draw comparisons to Zelda games of the past and the present really, with the recently released Breath of the Wild. Actually, I say recently released, but I suppose that was 2017, wasn't it? It's already been 3 years. Time certainly does fly, does it not? But the original release of Eternal Edge was actually released on April 12th of 2018, so it's been a few years between then and now, and I'll be honest with you, I never played this original release on Switch, so it's all new to me. You will play as the very bland and uninteresting character Cross in this game, who doesn't really have much dialogue or any real story to back him outside of just wanting to wake up his wife who is caught in an eternal slumber. The main goal of the game is to defeat the Skeleton King, who can only be defeated with the help of your wife, who is obviously caught in this slumber, so bringing her back is paramount to succeeding in the overall main quest of the title. But the Kingdom of Beor, where the game takes place, is large and expansive, full of other folks that will also need your help, thus you will get sidetracked often in this game with a plethora of side quests for you to take on. Eternal Edge Plus is definitely a game that won't be remembered for its character development or any of its story beats because they're just not all that interesting. There's a lot of cliches in this title and very, very little in the way of actual character development, and that includes your main character, who is more or less voiceless, doesn't really have any sort of an opinion on things, and is just bland and boring. So if you're jumping into Eternal Edge Plus looking for a deep, expansive storyline and fun characters and memorable story arcs, you absolutely will not find it here. You can forget about that right now. What you will find, however, is a pretty decent knockoff of a Zelda game in a lot of other areas, including the combat system, which is not exceptional or particularly memorable at all, but serves its purpose. You can lock on with the left trigger button if you're playing on an Xbox controller, and you'll swing away with the action button. That is the majority of this combat. You can also duck and dodge out of the way, and there's a lot of different equipment and upgrades to gather along the way, as you would expect. You are able to set potions to the directional pad for quick healing, and you'll also gather some spells and abilities like fireballs and bombs that you can hurl at enemies, though strangely some of these spells seem to go off in the wrong direction, one of many glitches that I would come across in my hours of play. There is a bit of a crafting element to the game, using the collected items that you've gathered across the world in order to create those mentioned bombs or other items that can help you in your journey. One of the elements of Eternal Edge Plus that I actually did quite like was that you could combine a weapon if it was the same as the current weapon you're using, so that you could make it more powerful. And because you do become quite over-encumbered with a lot of the same weapons in the overworld, it was nice that I was able to just combine them and feel like I was getting stronger instead of having to go back to a shop or something like that in order to get rid of them or break them down into other components. Outside of that, though, you're not going to find much innovative, new, or different in this combat system. It was fun enough, and it got the job done. It was a little bit clunky at times, and maybe the dashing wasn't the best, but overall, I would describe the combat of Eternal Edge Plus as serviceable. Outside of the overworld in this game, you will come across some dungeons which are similar to the older Zelda games in terms of being top-down view and exploring them by killing enemies in rooms to open new doors and finding keys. I will say Eternal Edge Plus perhaps isn't as puzzle-heavy as some of the better Zelda games, but the dungeons were still entertaining, and they do switch up the pace in a way that is welcome. Eternal Edge Plus is pretty open-ended. You can go off in different directions and take quests in whatever order you wish. There are a lot of these side quests that you'll come across from different people across the landscape, and I must give credit where it's due. The game does a pretty good job of letting you know if you're strong enough for a certain area or a certain battle that appears on the map. There is a bigger map in the menu which you can pull up that shows all of the different regions of the world and the level that is appropriate for those areas, as well as a little map in the lower right that will help guide you to the next quest that you're on, and it's all pretty decently done. You can track these quests quite easily and be able to tell where you're going for the most part. Graphically, Eternal Edge Plus isn't going to win any awards. I would just say it looks okay. It gets the job done. There's some pretty low-res textures across its world, and the draw distance isn't anything to write home about. The characters themselves don't look all of that interesting. Sort of a bland, boring-looking game with nothing really inspirational about it. But I will say that the world is actually pretty expansive and large. There's a lot of different treasures to be found and areas to explore, and thankfully you can also teleport around areas that you've previously visited if you find well areas that act as travel points. But even playing at the max settings at 4K with everything cranked up, I was fairly underwhelmed on the whole, and the enemy designs are nothing to write home about either, pretty boring and bland. It's just an uninspired, mediocre looking game that offers no new settings or no interesting environments that you haven't seen done better in other games. I did quite enjoy the musical pieces that are in Eternal Edge Plus though, with a lot of piano ballads, nice orchestrated music throughout, very beautiful, very fitting for a nice open world setting. Despite the fact that the graphics weren't exceptional, the soundtrack definitely was, so the composer more than did his part. There's nothing exceptional about the actual sound effects in the game, with some clings and clangs that don't sound like anything you haven't heard in other titles either, but I did really like the soundtrack. You can probably tell if you've made it this far into the review by now that I just thought Eternal Edge was an okay title, not exceptional, and maybe it doesn't need to be. Some aggravating glitches did pop up from time to time, like I touched on a little bit earlier, including right in the beginning where my character froze and could not move out of place, but on the whole, glitches aside, this is a decent romp that will entertain you for quite a few hours. You're not going to be having deep conversations about this title after you've completed it with any of your friends, and you're probably not even going to really remember it a few hours after you've completed it on the whole. Adventure RPG fans could do quite a bit worse than Eternal Edge Plus. For more on Eternal Edge Plus and all of our other content, head on over to MediaMoogle.net where we have some great podcasts like the Gamer Joe Radio Show, our video game music podcast. And if you have enjoyed our video content today, please do consider hitting the subscribe button below. It really does help us bring a voice to the voiceless. If you really like us, you can head on over to patreon.com/MediaMoogle where we have 3 great tiers to choose from, or feel free to leave a donation in the link below. Thank you however you end up supporting Media Moogle.